and sort of make literature and literary scholarship real for our students. And so without any other further ado, I am very happy to announce that Dr. Alan Gribben is the 2021 Eugene Current-Garcia Award winner, and he is going to share with us a marvelous talk on living in Mark Twain's mind. A 50-year puzzle. So, Dr. Gribben.
Thank you, and good evening, President Graham, Alicia Lynham Bowen, officers and members of the Monroeville Literary Festival, officers and members of the Association of College English Teachers of Alabama, and others who have joined us. Thank you for the beautiful award. You can see it here. Given the impressive list of prior recipients, I have tremendous gratitude for those who saw fit to confer this distinction on my scholarly work. Tonight, I want to bring all of you along on a half-century journey I undertook to identify as many as possible the literary resources that shaped Mark Twain's electric mind, which include the books that he and his family owned, but also the stories, poems, essays, songs, plays, operas, newspapers, and magazines with which they were familiar. Many of the people in attendance via Zoom are the friends I made along the way, both the Mark Twain scholars and those who half-jokingly keep asking my wife, Irene, why has this research taken Alan so long? In putting together the puzzle of Mark Twain's literary resources, there are four corner pieces or major sites. Twain's architecturally restored boyhood home near the Mississippi River in Hannibal, Missouri, from which he drew his finest literary inspirations. His magnificent 19-room house in Hartford that he built with his first earnings as a travel writer. His beatific summer retreat in Elmira, New York, where Twain spent more than 20 summers and in whose octagonal study overlooking the Chemung River Valley, he wrote much of Huckleberry Finn. And the Mark Twain Library in Reading, Connecticut, that Twain helped establish with book donations and a monetary bequest after he settled nearby as a prosperous and semi-retired author. There are, in addition, 13 other relevant libraries and private collections. So let's begin. The year is 1966. I arrive in Berkeley, California in a VW microbus and inadvertently drive into a huge march protesting the Vietnam War. I have grown up as an Eagle Scout in a Midwestern town that has a population of 16,000 people on a good day, and earned a master's degree in Oregon. Now I've been accepted into UC Berkeley's prestigious PhD program in English, but I was admitted without any fellowship support, and behind the scenes I am struggling to make ends meet. Then, one fortunate day in 1967, I noticed a small note card tacked to the hallway bulletin board in Wheeler Hall. A graduate student research assistant is wanted by the Mark Twain Papers, the repository of Mark Twain's notebooks, letters, manuscripts, and books donated by his daughter. The successful applicant will be assigned to its ongoing publishing project. I'm lucky enough to be hired as an editorial assistant. Up until then, I had viewed Twain as just another significant American author. But the more months I spend poring over his writings in my office on the fourth floor of the magisterial Bancroft Library, the more enthralled I become with the range and depth of his thinking. It is the intense, mercurial Frederick Anderson, editor of the Mark Twain Papers within the Bancroft Library, who first suggests the reconstruction of Mark Twain's library as a dissertation topic. You see, during Mark Twain's happiest decades in the 1870s, 1880s, and early 1890s, his elaborate library room was the crown jewel of his sumptuous home in Hartford, Connecticut. Shelves upon shelves that housed books reflecting his curious, brilliant mind. Additional bookcases were scattered throughout his house. At one time, this collection numbered more than 3,000 titles. Twain didn't just passively read those books to absorb their knowledge. For him, reading was a participatory sport He responded on the pages of the books he read, filling their blank spaces with quips and markings that are known as marginalia, that alternately praised, mocked, dissected, or dissented. If he had an idea he couldn't word it, Twain wrote about the author of a biography of Edgar Allan Poe, a volume of unspeakable rot, he jotted in the margin of a book of amateurish poetry, of a book whose title page announced that it had been revised. If so, in the name of God, what was it like before it was revised? Unquote. His wide array of readings, from the boy books that gave rise to Tom Sawyer to the narratives of enslaved people that shaped the character of Jim and Huckleberry Finn, left their imprint on his novels, short stories, and essays, works that would help define and elevate American literature near the end of the 19th century and at the dawn of the 20th. It's a puzzle to me as to why such a seemingly obvious subject has not already been explored by a more seasoned scholar. I see Fred Anderson, wreathed in his tobacco smoke and ensconced in his swiveling editor's chair, as he soberly lays out the reasons why no one has previously undertaken this task. The need for extensive travel, the time required to search for the far-flung volumes, the lack of financial support for the research, and the unlikelihood of any resulting compensation. Books owned by famous authors or other prominent figures are known as association copies, and they possess a monetary value, especially if they are signed or annotated. Fred Anderson explains that after Twain's death in 1910, his library, so carefully curated, so brimming with various testimonies about his life, underwent a disastrous dispersal. His only surviving child, Clara, sold a large proportion of the book collection in 1911. 4 decades later, in 1951, endeavoring to pay off her musician husband's gambling debts, she held a virtual fire sale at her Hollywood home that scattered most of his remaining library throughout the country. These chaotic events had followed massive book donations that she and her father made to several community libraries. But it is 1969. I am an eager young graduate student wearing long sideburns and bell-bottom pants who wants to assist biographers and scholars studying Twain's literary work. The idea seems like an adventure. And besides, how long could the task really take? I resolve that my doctoral dissertation will investigate Twain's library and reading. So the first pieces of the puzzle fall into place there at Berkeley, especially when one day an undergraduate student with the liveliest eyes I had ever seen walks through the doors of the Mark Twain papers looking for assistance with her English seminar paper on Mark Twain. If I had never answered that note card on a bulletin board and become employed there, I would have missed the love of my life. I embark on the first stage of my research armed with 3x5 note cards, a box of ballpoint pens, a faded blue VW Beetle, and a Midwestern can-do sense of optimism. By dint of much correspondence, I traced Twain's library remnants to places in 9 states: California, Connecticut, Illinois, Missouri, Nevada, New York, North Carolina, Texas, and Virginia. And I managed to reach those destinations and inspect the books in all of them. Mark Twain private collectors open their sacred shelves to me, and college librarians proudly show me, wearing white gloves, their one hallowed Twain library volume. Book collecting, like any other hobby, can become addictive, and I soon intuit that if I'm to maintain the trust and cooperation of serious collectors, I can't be prowling about for possible acquisitions of my own. So I stay clear of any purchases, and when I occasionally spot opportunities to obtain association copies, I notify the Mark Twain Papers, the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, the Mark Twain Boyhood Home and Museum in Hannibal, or one of the private collectors who are being helpful to me. The Mark Twain Library in Redding, Connecticut contains over 200 books that Twain and his daughter Clara personally donated from his shelves. At the rustic library in 1970, still housed in its original wooden building constructed in 1910, I painstakingly review the volumes, cross-referencing them against auction catalogs. On my proliferating note cards, I jot down whether Clemens or a member of his family signed the book or wrote any marginalia, together with its other interesting features. 2 successive librarians invite me to peruse the library's general stacks, and to my surprise, I find dozens of books signed or annotated in Twain's handwriting that bear library stamps and are in circulation with recent recall dates. I pause to imagine a schoolboy or girl chewing gum and flipping their pages, having no inkling whose marginal notes they are glancing at. We remove the books to a safer location. Later on, these volumes will be accorded excellent shelf space in an air-conditioned environment. As the second section of the puzzle falls into place, I begin to grasp the scope of what Twain read. He owned dozens of books on evolution, astronomy, and the battles between science and religion. His tastes and passions in poetry ran the gamut of extremes. Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, Alfred Lord Tennyson, Rudyard Kipling, James Whitcomb Riley, Robert Browning, writers as diverse as the 18th and 19th century British novelists Defoe, Smollett, Fielding, Dickens, Trollope, and Thackeray, and even turn of the 20th century authors such as Stephen Crane and Anatole France found places in his library. He mastered 3 foreign languages sufficiently enough to read certain masterpieces in their original French, German, or Italian. He read English translations of Caesar's commentaries, Horace Odes, and Plutarch's Lives. He read nearly every early detective book and dozens of science fiction works. He practically breathed the lines of Shakespeare. Returning from my trips, I sort out the note cards and type up the results on my Royal manual typewriter. If I want to double check something, I refer to the Mark Twain papers housed in the Bancroft Library, or turn to the National Union catalog of pre-1956 imprints, bound in 754 huge volumes. Fred Anderson becomes so accustomed to seeing me waiting anxiously outside the doors of his archive in the mornings that he entrusts me with a key to the Mark Twain papers so that I can work there among its collection of materials after hours and on weekends. I wind my way to my parked car after midnight countless times through a deserted and darkened campus. Fred partly does this huge favor because I have been employed by him as a part-time research editor since 1967. Through my inquiries, I begin to see how books can drift on invisible currents to remote locations. The pieces of the puzzle lay in heaps in unanticipated places. In 1970, I obtained information that the Clemens family's housekeeper, Katie Leary, had been presented with books from Twain's library as gifts after his death. I tracked Leary's descendants to Rice Lake, Wisconsin, and an elderly woman who had inherited the books informs me over a crackling telephone line that I am welcome to come and look at them. But when I finally scrounge together enough money to make the trip and knock on her door, the same woman informs me that she's become very ill and can no longer see me. She says she is closing up her house and moving to Florida for her health, and she understandably has far more on her mind than old books, including the paper sacks full of books outside on her porch, waiting for a charity truck to pick up. With that, the ailing woman closes the door firmly. I kneel down and look through this row of sacks. Fanning through book after book, I find that many of the volumes display Twain's unmistakable signature, including a copy of Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Some of the books that he annotated might be worth as much as $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 apiece on the rare book market. Yet here they sit, abandoned on a porch. Most people would not recognize S.L. Clemens as a signature, and these volumes will be lost. With no time to spare, I hop into my car, drive downtown, locate a telephone booth, there were such things in 1970, look through its directory, and call every person with the same name as the book's owner. Someone tells me that I should try the town's newspaper office where the woman's daughter works. Catherine Antenny answers the phone, and after hearing my urgent summons, comes to her mother's home and assumes custody of the books. Guided by my suggestions, she and her husband eventually donate those approximately 90 volumes, many containing Twain's signature and marginalia, to the Mark Twain Archive at Elmira College in Elmira, New York, where generations of scholars can have access to them. Such coincidences as the one in Rice Lake, Wisconsin, seem to follow me wherever I do research. When I order a book title through interlibrary loan, to my astonishment, I receive a copy from the UCLA stacks containing Mark Twain's signature and notes. It had inadvertently entered their general collection at an early date. UCLA promptly makes a gift of it to the Mark Twain papers at UC Berkeley. In 1974, I am newly married and wrapping up my graduate studies in preparation for a teaching job at the University of Texas at Austin. As a final step, I need the formal approval of my dissertation director, the eminent literary critic and scholar, Henry Nash Smith, in order to officially file for graduation and be able to start my new job. However, by this time, Professor Smith has retired from UC Berkeley and is living in Pacific Grove, California. So the night before the filing is due, Irene and I drive down windswept Highway 1, toting along my 2,370-page dissertation. Dr. Smith has been getting regular updates and drafts of my dissertation, so I assume that he will sign with a quick pro forma flourish and we will be on our way home. Instead, he solemnly carries the 7 bound volumes into his back study and closes the door. As the hours tick by, I realize, to my horror, the meticulous Dr. Smith intends to read the entire thing. What if he now says no? He's never been completely sold on my decision to organize the disparate information into an author title catalog. I adopted that unorthodox format as the only possible way I could present so many miscellaneous facts: where the book was located, its physical condition, the history of its ownerships, its auction prices, the presence of Twain's notations, the wording of its inscriptions, the ink or pencil he employed, his comments to other people about the book, whether he utilized it in any of his literary writings, the date on which I examined it, what other scholars have said about his relationship to the book, and so forth. I pace around his living room. Irene falls asleep on a sofa. At 6:00 a.m., as the morning sun peeks over the rugged outcroppings of the beach, Dr. Smith emerges and with great seriousness signs the dissertation title page and the official form. My eyes blurry from lack of sleep, I drive back northward with Irene by my side as the restless Pacific Ocean unfurls into the distance on our left. A formidable puzzle was, how do I get my study into print? I have difficulty finding a book publisher so that I can win tenure and promotion. University presses are reluctant to undertake such a large, complex scholarly work. Eventually, I sign a contract with a commercial press, G.K. Hall in Boston, that takes on books like mine, whose market will be research libraries and a specialized group of scholars. But just as the book is about to go into production in 1977, I am notified that the item I have long been searching for in Reading, Connecticut, the accession book that recorded the authors, titles, and editions of 1,751 books Twain donated to the Mark Twain Library, but that were later worn out, lost, or sold, has finally turned up in an old file cabinet. Stop the presses. It takes me 2 years to pry open my catalog and insert the new entries. Finally, in 1980, an expanded version of my dissertation appears in 2 dense volumes. Although the entire run of 500 copies of Mark Twain's library sells out in 16 months, a federal court ruling that unsold book inventories are taxable by the IRS halts my publisher, G.K. Hall, from reprinting any multi-volume books, including mine. As an assistant professor, I can't afford their $2,000 offer for ownership of the linotype printing plates of my life's work. Instead, they're sold as scrap metal and melted down. Those repeated research trips in which I had invested thousands of dollars, as well as my late 20s and all of my 30s, had only netted me a royalty of a few $100s. To my chagrin, I began to see my 2 volumes listed in rare book catalogs for upwards of $200, $300, once even for $550. But the publication and publicity surrounding that first book brings in new leads about Twain's library books from across the country. Scholars, collectors, and libraries contact me with titles of Twain Association copies that they have in their possession. I diligently file this information away, and every time I get a break from my full-time teaching, I schedule trips to inspect these volumes. I am especially blessed to make the acquaintance of the good-natured, generous bookseller, collector, and scholar, Kevin McDonald, who lives in Austin, Texas. His collection of 10,000 items, including hundreds of books from Twain's library, stuns me. It's the largest assemblage of Twainiana in the world, and he lets me visit him a number of times in his beautiful hillside home west of Austin and peruse the association copies at my leisure. More than that, he teaches me things about books, inscriptions, and Twain's habits that even Fred Anderson never knew about. In the 1980s, Irene and I welcome our children, Walter and Valerie, and my scholarship becomes a true family business. Our children never visited Disney World or Six Flags, but they resided for months in Mark Twain's pastoral summer home outside Elmira, New York. Perched on a steep hill to catch the breezes in an era prior to air conditioning, Quarry Farm is perfectly situated for creativity. While I do my research at the Mark Twain Archive at Elmira College, the children clamber about the grounds and venture into the trees that surround Twain's famous octagonal study, where he wrote so much of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. We live on an academic salary, and our family vacations are in places touched or affected by Twain. Our family albums contain shots of our young son and our toddler daughter in Deer Isle, Maine, where the grandson of Twain's first biographer has retained some manuscripts and books. He and his wife cook us up a dinner of lobster and huckleberry pie. Every 4 years, we return, Walter and Valerie, now teenagers, to Quarry Farm for the International Conference on the State of Mark Twain Studies, expertly organized by Gretchen Charlo and then Barbara Snedeker. It's a time when I get to connect with my friends and fellow scholars whose work I deeply admire and who encourage me to continue my mission. Kent Rasmussen, Laura Scandera Trombley, Peter Messent, Patrick Ober, John Bird, Gary Scharnhorst, Taylor Roberts, Jeffrey Melton, Barbara Schmidt, John Pascal, Susan Harris, Terry Ogle, Judith Lee, Ben Click, Henry Feldman, and others. Our collective family memories are inextricably entwined with Twain. In 1991, we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where I will serve as head of an English and philosophy department for 20 years, and where master educators and scholars Bob Evans, Eric Sterling, John Havard, and other well-wishers facilitate a continuation of my project. In this town, Irene and I decorate our home with items collected along our road trips. My daughter jokes that when growing up, she thought Mark Twain must be a distant relative because we have so many photographs of him. A commissioned portrait of Twain painted for Scholastic magazine hangs in our house. In the mid-2000s, I temporarily assembled my research notes on our long dining room table, where they seemingly calcify. Gradually, I end up living as often in Twain's period as in mine. I immerse myself in the culture and events of the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Civil War in America, the Gilded Age, the prime ministers of Britain, political unrest in Austria, the debates about Darwin's theory of evolution, improvements in telescopes that could peer into outer space, lynchings and the injustices of racial segregation, the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. Mark Twain's reading influences the collection of 2,000 used books I assemble on my own shelves, well-thumbed copies that had their first printing before the Model T arrived on the scene. I am now at a place in my career where I can mentor graduate students who attend Auburn University at Montgomery. Larry Burkove, a dear friend and Mark Twain scholar specializing in Twain's Nevada years, steers Joseph Cecilla my way for his master's degree, and Joe's talent and capabilities are instantly apparent. Sarah Fredericks, then president of the student government on campus, also writes her master's thesis under my supervision, and her dissertation, like Joe's did, is on its way to becoming a published book. The new millennium with its internet connectivity opens up new troves of puzzle pieces. I once thought that replacing my manual Royal typewriter with an IBM Selectric 2 machine had revolutionized the game. But with a Dell computer and the global internet, a vast fund of information suddenly opens up for me from my study in Montgomery. I feel like a monk accustomed to the slow progress of a quill on vellum parchment who has lived to see the invention of the printing press. Suddenly, I can now search with a few keystrokes for books that have been scanned and uploaded by university libraries. Moreover, the incredible services of Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, JSTOR, the Digital Britannica, and other databases are at my disposal. However, as though to balance these advantages and make things complicated, forgers, including the infamous Mark Hoffman of Salt Lake City, have tried their hand at imitating the signature and sometimes even the marginal notes of Samuel L. Clemens. I must now scrutinize every letter and each word written in books advertised as coming from Mark Twain's personal library. In one case, I anger a scholar who has an article in press and also the owner of a set of Mark Twain's writings in which Twain supposedly commented retrospectively in the margins, second-guessing himself in frequent notes. My insistence that these jottings are spurious is subsequently confirmed. I eventually become so practiced at verifying authentic handwriting and spotting forgeries that in 2019, I am the first to authenticate a signature young Sam Clemens scratched in the cave outside Hannibal and that Cindy Lovell found with a flashlight. As I grow older and learn more, what I appreciate most about Clemens is how his wide reading changed the ways he thought. The numerous slave narratives and anti-slavery exposés and novels in his library made him ashamed that during his youth and early manhood, he had followed his father's example in endorsing the enslavement of African Americans. Anthropological works about Native Americans made him more sympathetic toward the persecuted tribal survivors. Biographies of early astronomers, scientists, and physicians left him suspicious of religious opposition to new theories. His immersion in studies of economics and labor issues softened his stances regarding social classes and political divisions. Reading about the atrocities committed in the name of colonialism made him a formidable opponent of that oppressive domination. Fired up by books exposing cruel scientific experiments on dogs and other animals, he turned his wrath on this heartless practice, reminding readers, "The dog is a gentleman. I hope to go to his heaven, not man's." He was just as avid a reader of travel narratives, owning more than 100 of them, as he was an intrepid and skilled traveler himself. It was Twain who declared, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on those accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." Now, entering my mid-70s, I decide that it's time to wrap up my life's detective work of tracking down Twain's library books and studying the patterns of his reading. Even empty nesting has a Twain focus, as Irene and I revisit the major locations of my previous journey in 1970. Much has changed. When I travel to the river port of Hannibal, Missouri, I reconnect with the knowledgeable curator of Twain's boyhood home and museum, Henry Sweets, who has improved the historic sites with innovative renovations. This time, my son and daughter joined the reunion as adults. At the Mark Twain House and Museum in Hartford, which now has a quite substantial collection of books from Twain's library after winning an auction of 271 volumes in 1997, the congenial Steve Courtney plays host to Irene and me. And instead of my having to copy down every remark written in the margins, Steve employs a high-definition camera to capture the images and send them digitally. It is notable that Samuel Clemens only received a fourth-grade education before being ripped from school to toil as a printer's apprentice to support his impoverished family. His voracious reading strikes me as his determined way to continue his education against all odds. Yet Twain typically downplayed the staggering breadth and depth of his reading. Upon his death, his circle of friends, credulously believing his public denials of reading much of anything, helped cement a persistent image of Mark Twain as an educated original. Even his close friend, William Dean Howells, remarked, "Of all the literary men I've known, he was the most unliterary in his make and manner." It was Samuel Clemens who designed and burnished the persona of Mark Twain as a wry American everyman, arisen from the soil of his birthplace in a cabin in the tiny village of Florida, Missouri, and tutored by the lapping waters of the river wharf of Hannibal. This was because Twain's books were sold door to door, and his customer base consisted of poor Americans, the wives of carpenters and mechanics and farmers. Clemens was hyper aware that he should never resemble one of the snobbish elites he mocked so ferociously. My research helps eradicate the image of Twain as an author who is barely acquainted with the writings of others, though I doubt if Twain would congratulate me on this accomplishment after all of his efforts to hide his erudition. My research completed, or as completed as it will ever be, what publisher will I trust to put on paper my life's work of probing the mind of this man with a genius for wit and phrasing? I've already found the answer to my question, and in the city of my residence. Led by the visionary publisher Suzanne LaRosa and the indomitable editor-in-chief Randall Williams, New South Books is an independent publishing house that has already been composing the issues for a scholarly journal that Irene and I have been editing since 2009, the Mark Twain Journal, The Author in His Era. Suzanne and Randall accept the challenge of bringing out Mark Twain's literary resources, a reconstruction of his library and reading. Volume 1, released in 2019, contains 25 essays evaluating the phases and dimensions of Twain's reading. It also includes a critical bibliography describing other scholars' many contributions to this subject. Volume 2, The Tail That Wags the Dog, contains an immense annotated catalog and a comprehensive subject index. Delayed by the pandemic, this second part is scheduled for release toward the end of the current year. When this volume appears, the final piece of the puzzle will fall into place. The moment that purchasers or library readers of Mark Twain's literary resources open these volumes and their detailed index, they will then instantly know precisely as much as I do about all of these subjects. As I prepare this talk, I am still in the process of proofreading the catalog entries. 2 years ago, an interviewer asked me how many total entries are in the catalog, and I didn't have a definitive answer. By 1980, I had compiled nearly 5,000 entries for the books, stories, poems, essays, plays, operas, songs, newspapers, and magazines with which Twain was demonstrably acquainted. Recently, I get around to counting the entries for this new, revised, and expanded version, There are almost 6,000. Additional books will inevitably be uncovered in the years ahead. New forgeries will need to be detected. Fresh eyes will discern things that I missed. But Mark Twain's literary resources will provide a matrix within which these discoveries can be set into place. One of my favorite graduate school professors, Frederick Cruz, offered a reassuring compliment after reading an advanced copy of Mark Twain's literary resources. "Alan," he said, "this book will outlive you." What more could a scholar ask? I have at last reached the moment in my life where I can turn my attention to, gasp, other authors and different writing endeavors. Irene and I are elated that a reliable and gifted and younger scholar, Joe B. Fulton of Baylor University, has assumed the responsibilities of editor and publisher of the Mark Twain Journal and is already taking its next issue to press. I dedicated Mark Twain's literary resources to my wife, Irene, who has shared her husband and her life with Twain, and somewhere along the line blossomed as a scholar in her own right. She carries the history of this book in her mind. She remembers all the key players we met during our travels. The woman who, when we married, had only read a few books assigned in a Mark Twain seminar, now regularly discusses Twain's authorial decisions over dinner. As a closing reflection, I will observe that in researching Mark Twain's life, I have lived my life. And along the way, I made friendships that have endured the test of time. My thanks to all of you who have joined me on this journey.
Congratulations again, Dr. Gribben. Now, if anybody has any questions or just general congratulations for Dr. Gribben, feel free to unmute and share those.
It's Dean Winslow at Stanford, and I just want to say, Dr. Gribben, what a magnificent, magnificent oration that was, and what an amazing scholarly life that you've lived. And thank you so much for sharing it with all of us.
I'm glad to hear that other people got something out of this. I tried to bring a lot to this talk so that you could get an idea. I mean, it was really half a century, and just and difficult at times and discouraging from time to time, as I tried to share.
Can I be heard here?
I hear you.
Hi. I'm just figuring this out. I've been in on this since the beginning, but just realized belatedly that I needed to click on a few things for my picture and voice. Anyway, Alan, I also enjoyed the talk very much and learned a few things about your experience that I hadn't known before. But what struck me the most were your comments about those almost serendipitous little accidents that changed your life. If you read that interview that I gave for the Mark Twain Circle recently, you may recall that I also commented on little accidental turning points, and it kind of scares the hell out of me to think back and realize how easily I could have missed those turning points. And the same may be true for you. If you hadn't seen that original notice on the bullet, was it on a bulletin board at the bank?
And a very small note card. Well, thank goodness other people missed it.
No, well, I was at Berkeley at that time, and maybe you were lucky I didn't see it before you did, but who knows? I think we both came out okay. Anyway, congratulations on your award, and especially congratulations on your new wonderful grandson.
Thank you very much, Kent. I remember Henry Naismith, when I came back and told him that I had discovered these sacks of books about to be given away on a front porch, he said, well, these things can only happen if you really get into something, if you really are invested in it, and then things are possible. But still, I mean, just think if I'd come a day earlier, a day later, just amazing what to think about.
It's been many years now. Can you give us an honest answer to this question? Did you for even a moment consider just grabbing those bags and running?
Well, that's why I mentioned my having been an Eagle Scout at the outset. They would have fit in my trunk. That is a fact. But no, I didn't. It didn't really cross my mind. I just was mainly afraid that they would get lost, and I'd never be able to catalog them. But I do have something to say about serendipitous or incredible moments. The reason that I met Irene and had a chance to converse with her was that we took turns waiting on students who came to use the books that we had kind of taken from the stacks about Mark Twain, and we had them on deposit in the room where the Mark Twain papers were in. And so students necessarily had to come there to do their research, and we took turns each day, and it was somebody else's turn to wait on the students that day, but he was a smoker, and we worked in one room, and the manuscripts were there, and it just wasn't possible to smoke in there. Later, we were transferred, but because of the student riots, actually, to a safer place upstairs where Fred Anderson could smoke and other people did. But anyway, he was a smoker, and he wanted a break. And as he went out the door, there was someone coming that way, and he turned and said, "You take this one now." And Irene walked in the door. And I got to help her, and we became friends. But I mean, I always kid her about the different names she would have had if she had come 5 minutes sooner.
What can I say? It was love at first sight. I walked in the door. It was the Bancroft Library, first floor, about 6 o'clock.
It was the Doe Library. The Doe Library.
And the sun was coming in, and this man passed me and said, "You got the next one, Grib." And my eyes are looking for Grib, and I saw Alan's eyes, and I just stopped. And it was, I don't know, was it love at first sight? Probably. But anyway, that's all she wrote. And I want to say thank you for everyone for coming. I recognize so many names, and I do keep the history in my head. And sometimes Alan says, "Do you have to remember everything?" And anyway, I see Michael Torregrossa, and I've never met him, but he's one of the Mark Twain Journal people that I keep interacting with. I see several names that hey, hi, Michael. I'm glad you're here. So that's all.
And speaking of love at first sight, the littlest Twainiac would like to show you the first volume published by New South Books, Mark Twain's Literary Resources, available now. I dropped it into the chat section, and volume 2 will be forthcoming. But thank you for everyone. I was texting my brother Walter, and we were really remarking that everyone here, this is our family history.
Yeah.
And this is like a family home movie, and it feels like a family reunion. So even if it might be the first time I'm seeing you, welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight.
By the way, our publisher, Suzanne LaRosa, in the corner there. Suzanne LaRosa, editor-in-chief.
Randall
Williams. And they're taking on the second volume, which is the annotated catalog and its index. So I have only lived with this book 50 years, but other people have lived with it longer, and some friendships are longer than mine with Alan. So thank you for being here. But I got to tell you, I love to take credit for the graphics. Mm-hmm. The new book is going to have a color cover. It's a painted portrait of Mark Twain by a noted artist named Susan Durkee. and she gave us permission to reprint her painting of Mark Twain. And all I can do is ask, and I asked, and she said yes. So I'm so thrilled with that, and it's I just can't wait to see the next issue. The next volume. So, and yes, I have read every word several times, starting with the dissertation when Alan just said, just look at it. And I did several times. All right, everyone, please
keep chatting.
Keep chatting. And
Irene,
there's Dr. Cruz.
Irene,
hi, Fred.
Irene was fortunate that we met in 1971, and she didn't have to go with me on that that trip. I put 11,000 miles on that Volkswagen going to those different states in 1970. So she was spared that.
Can I ask Valerie a quick question?
Yes, we're here.
Did you ever figure out how your family's related to Mark Twain?
You know, when I was little, I truly did think that Twain was a relative because there were so many pictures. And not only that, he was a relative who sent a lot of books. Because one of my memories is growing up with Walter, and when my dad was reviewing all the Mark Twain books every year, we would get all these packages, and my brother and I would go, presents, presents. And we'd open it up and be like, oh, it's more Mark Twain books to review. So I now think he's a distant uncle.
Why not?
A cranky one.
Yeah.
We kept him away from you kids.
Alan, can I say, if I were to list all your qualities as a scholar, as a gentleman, as a man, I'd be here all night just as a start. But I think the best tribute I can give to you and to your dear Irene is to tell you, hot off the presses, I have 2 of 18 essays based on Mark Twain on the Move that were given to me today. And one boy said, in this second third of Mark Twain on the Move, I learned many new facts and details pertaining to Twain's travels abroad, in addition to what he observed, his opinions, and his comedic twist on it all. And the other student says, through his adventures, Twain has taught me lifelong lessons and shows me the result of needing to live my life to the fullest. They wouldn't have written this had they not been reading Mark Twain on the Move. So that's all you, and they thank you, and I thank you with all our hearts.
Dr. Melton and I see Jeff is here, and he may want to say something, but Dr. Melton and I tried to rescue a forgotten part of Mark Twain's writings. If you'd ask a person in the 19th century who Mark Twain was, they would have said a travel writer. Of course, today, many people only think of him as a fiction writer or a social commentator, and his travel writings, which are filled with so many great nuggets, have been ignored. Jeff and I thought too long, so we put together a little collection called the Mark Twain on the Move, and tried to leave out the sightseeing and just put in the truly fun parts of his travel books. Well, anyway, we made a effort, didn't we, Jeff?
Dr. Melton, I've never had the privilege of meeting you, but I know Alan, so the compliments go to you too. The boys love the books, and for high school boys to enjoy reading Mark Twain on the Move, that's everything, and a testament to both of you for your skills to put it together. So thank you both.
Jeff and I shopped that book around and finally found a publisher with just one problem. After they accepted it and we got all excited, and we got way into it. They said, "Oh, and by the way, our sales department says you need to cut it in half." That was the worst set of meetings we had. Each of us would take turns stabbing one of our favorite parts of Mark Twain's writing in the heart and throwing it out off the table. It was just terrible. We had lovingly compiled this this compendium, and then we had to savagely tear it apart. There's no arguing with the sales department.
That's right.
Can you stand to hear a similar anecdote?
I always listen to Kent Rasmussen's anecdotes.
Before Mark Twain A to Z was published, it had gone through galleys. In fact, you were one of the scholars who read some of those galley pages for writing Puff. Remember that? The long sheets. Anyway, it was all set to be laid out, and I got a call from the young editor who was working on it. I went through several editors on that book. And the first thing she said is one of the stupidest things any editor could ever say to an author. "Oh, Kent, I have terrible news." And it happened that I just heard the Cambridge Companion to Mark Twain had come out, and I thought, "Oh God, what is that? Another encyclopedic work?" And the Facts on Files decided not to publish my book. That wasn't it. She said, the editor said they'd just done a cast off and I had to cut 100 pages. Not 100 pages of manuscript, the equivalent of 100 pages of print. And I immediately, my mind started racing, and I thought, where in the hell am I going to make 100 pages of cuts? Fortunately, I happened to call my agent the same day about another matter, and it didn't occur to me that that problem would interest her, but I happened to mention it to her, and she hit the ceiling and said, "That's their problem, not your problem." And she got on the phone, and we ended up, all I cut was entries on illustrators. And that was kind of funny because not long after the book came out, I heard from Shelley Fisher-Fishkin about it. And she was particularly interested in the entries on illustrators, which Penny David was working on. And I thought, isn't this funny? The first thing that anybody is interested in the book is the subject that I cut most of out of the book, but that all got restored in Critical Companion. But I can understand your agony with Mark Twain on the Move, getting that kind of, oh, by the way, cut it in half message. That must have hit you pretty hard.
Well, since we're all being so informal here, I'll say that I had given a talk some time back that I frankly was probably going to use because the audience was altogether different. I was going to use tonight, and then the award arrived, and I wrote this from scratch. This was just for this occasion, and I never recounted most of these things before. But it was kind of fun to get some perspective on it and share it with people who many of you are not really Mark Twain scholars, but friends of ours, and have just watched us try to pull this thing together. Anybody got any other observations about anything in the talk?
Your talk is magnificent.
Okay, I'm going to dive in and ask a question because I'm nosy. I would love to know if the Poe biographer that Twain snarked about was Griswold. I really, really want it to be that one. Is it?
It wasn't. In fact, it was a much later biographer.
Okay.
And he sort of churned out biographies of different people, and Twain called him the something like the the craziest hyena who ever stomped around a great poet's grave or something like that.
That's lovely. I would expect no less of Twain to look at a hack and say, "You are a hack."
His last name was Joyce, and I do. That does remind me of something though. I just couldn't get, as I said in my talk, I decided I better not sully my hands with trying to acquire any of these. I saw some real bargains here and there and passed them on to people, but if you start thinking about collecting, it kind of becomes consuming, and I just couldn't do it. I had to keep my research pure. If I started doing this sort of thing, it would just it would alter my campaign. And anyway, so I ended up in 1980 without any books by Mark Twain, owned by Mark Twain in my library. And then, incredibly, two people contacted me, and one of them was a retired professor at the University of Texas, and gave me books from Mark Twain's library, really nice books. The one from the professor was an English Puritan minister with Twain's savage comments all the way through. For example, where the minister said that this man had blasphemed and his wife and children were killed thereafter in a fire in their home. And Twain wrote, wouldn't it have been much more efficacious to kill the man instead of his family? And so and then I did buy a book that I could afford. So I ended up with a few books from a few association copies, but I didn't do it until my book came out. But it was hard to resist sometimes.
Alan, Jeffrey, may I say to you that I showed the 5 travel books to my students, and they were astounded that the 2 of you were able to cut it down to this one book. And they said, "You mean there's more?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, how did they do that?" And I said, "They're very wise and they're very smart." So one boy said, "But we've got the best of the best in Mark Twain on the Move." And I said, "Yes." Well, 3 of them said, "We love this book so much, it's not enough." So for their final papers, each of them are reading 3 of the travel books: Life on the Mississippi, The Innocents Abroad, and Roughing It. And to watch one of the guys who's not an avid reader, now he's an avid reader, and his parents are thanking me. I said, "Don't thank me, thank the editors of this book." They said, "He's waiting to go to wrestling practice and he's not reading a sports magazine. You see him holding a copy of Roughing It, we're showing it off to our relatives saying, the kid's really got something." So I thank both of you, because these are your youngest fans, except for your grandson.
Well, thank you, John. It reminds me to mention that the reason Mark Twain's travel writings, I think, aren't going over so big in the 21st century, he would go to places, Rome or the Holy Land, or German, climb the Alps in Germany or Italy, and then write about it. And we're just surfeited with travelogues and TV travel programs and so forth. And what he brought back, was firsthand reports about things. And we're very casual about far distances now and touristy sites and so forth. We're kind of jaded, actually. But hidden, or rather scattered throughout these books, are Twain just at his best. One scholar said of Mark Twain, he was an author who could not write an uninteresting sentence. And I think that's putting it very well. I mean, you just find yourself reading on to the next sentence, the next sentence. He's really a master craftsman at that. And of course, he had a long apprenticeship on newspapers and magazines and really honed his skill.
Alan, I just want to say I'm very proud of you. And I was in Baltimore with Jeff when you won, I think it was like the Mark Twain Society Lifetime Achievement Award. And I remember the person introducing you saying that the members of the Mark Twain Society are a lot more fun than the members of the Franz Kafka Society. And one thing I always appreciated is your sense of humor and your kindness, and also the legacy that you have with your students, like mentoring wonderful students like Sarah. So I just want to say I'm very proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was Dr. Sterling at Auburn University, Montgomery, and he is one of our master teachers. Just it was always a privilege to sit down in on any of his classes. I appreciate that. Thank you. I will say, he mentioned Baltimore and a conference. If you also remember, the president at that session was a kind of a joking fellow, and there's so many. Mark Twain was an inveterate practical joker, and for some reason it attracts scholars who are merry pranksters. So I always have to be careful about emails I'm getting. I had to look closely when they notified me by email that I had been given this award. I got to be careful here. Who could this? Is this for sure a genuine announcement? Mark Twain attracts within its fold of scholars, the circle of Mark Twain scholars has some very merry fellows, and we have a lot of fun studying this man. I belong to different author societies, and it's really fascinating how when you go to their conferences and meetings, they have the flavor of the author they're studying. I belonged for a long time to Edith Horton's, the Edith Horton Society. I edited a collection of her letters to her lover that no one had previously known about, and the contrast between their society and the Mark Twain Society is just the I don't know, the contrast between Brooklyn and Fifth Avenue or something. It's or the Edgar Allan Poe Society. They all have a different flavor. They are affected by the author they spend so much time studying.
Alan, this is Bob of Bob and Ruth fame. Could you tell everybody the—
Speaking of pranksters.
Could you tell the story about your speech at the downtown where the fellow showed up?
Now, this is something I thought maybe Bob had a hand in, but he was actually as aghast and shocked as anyone. I'd been invited to talk downtown at the historical. I'm drawing a blank. The Alabama Historical
Archives, Alabama
Archive. I couldn't think of the word. And the fellow who set it up had to leave for some reason. He introduced me and walked away. And just as I was walking to the podium, it was a pretty good sized crowd. A fellow dressed as Mark Twain in a white suit with a white wig on pushed past me and went to the podium and began a monologue a la Hal Holbrook, doing bits from Mark Twain's writings. And everybody looked at me figuring that this was some gag that I had dreamed up or something. And I was going, I have no idea what's going on. And the fellow just kept going and going and going. And it was not a very good imitation, and he didn't have a dresser, I guess, and his coat was buttoned wrongly, so one side was higher than the other, and he just kept going and going and going, and the people backstage said, go out and tell him it's time for your talk, and I said, I'm not getting out there, and the fellow who had introduced me and was in charge had to vacate the premises. There was nobody there. And finally they just were becoming very, very aggressive. Get out there and take him off the stage. It had now been 20 minutes and he was still going at it. And I said, do you see that fellow in the front row? That's a photographer from the Montgomery Advertiser. I am not going to be spliced across the front pages of America, dragging Mark Twain off the stage. And finally, I think one of the custodians or somebody went out and just implored the poor fellow to stop. And he said, well, okay, let me do one more bit. And then he said, and don't forget, my acts are free. I perform at a lot of rest homes and he said nursing homes, and I also do King Arthur, Abraham Lincoln, and he just went on this long list. And so I had to cut my talk by I think 50% or more. He'd used up most of my time. I later inquired around, and they said, oh yeah, he lives in a small town up here. He's known for this sort of thing. He watches in the newspaper for events and goes and launches into one of his performances that he feels would be most fit for that. Oh boy. And the worst part was watching Bob and Ruth laughing in the audience, not at him, but at the situation it put me in.
Thanks.
Dad?
Dad? My son tunes in.
Hi, it's Walter. Greetings to everyone from the Veterans Association Hospital or Veterans Administration Hospital in Long Beach, California, where I'm on call right now, so I have to duck out.
This guy, people, has been on the front lines fighting the pandemic. He's in the last year of his fellowship for critical care pulmonology, and he wasn't even supposed to be in the hospitals this part of his fellowship, but they drafted him. He's been helping out at various hospitals, and he's seen a lot. As you know, the Los Angeles area has been one of the scary sites at times.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for finding a minute to tune in, son.
Oh, absolutely, Dad. And I wanted to share my memory. I think so. Before I moved out here to California, I spent 8 years in St. Louis, Missouri, which I think, I guess Providence or something guided me back there to this, right to the shores of the Mississippi River, which played such an important role in Mark Twain's story. And, one of my fondest memories was my dad came up there and was finishing up some of his research, and we took a road trip up there to north central Missouri. We went to Florida, and we went to the
Florida, Missouri,
yes, what I said, we drove up to Florida from Missouri, and visited. We went to Hannibal and we went to Florida.
And
And
Marthasville.
yes, yes. And where they have the reported Mark Twain boyhood cabin, right?
Yeah, and Perry, Missouri.
Perry, Missouri.
And this was quite coincidental because this was the last place I was visiting, just as it had been the first place I visited in 1970. And it was the last place that I visited before I put the finishing touches on my book. And it was so nice to go to these places with my son.
It was a real honor to go there. And
he closed it out.
This trip that you'd started with Mom, years ago, you rounded out with me. And I just happened to be in the right place at the right time for that. And it was really an honor to be a part of it, Dad. It really was. And it was a great road trip. And we even saw that plaque that was dedicated to Mark Twain's favorite lawyer.
Alan, I had submitted a question online earlier this evening, so I want to make sure it gets asked. And I'm sure you've been asked 1,000 times, but this came from all my students today because I told them I'd be watching you tonight. They're all partying tonight because trimester testing is over, hopefully socially distanced, probably not. But in the meantime, you're on a desert island. You can only have one work by Twain. They want to know what it would be that you would enjoy reading over and over.
I would shock everyone by picking Life on the Mississippi. It's got the heart of his boyhood. In fact, I wish that teachers who feel they can't teach Huckleberry Finn because of the offensive language, I wish they would find their way to Life on the Mississippi, or at least the parts of it where he's learning how to be a pilot. I think it's very helpful to young people to see him trying to master a very difficult craft, and all the discouragements and sometimes humiliations he undergoes, and yet the satisfaction that he eventually gains when he obtains his pilot license in 1859. That part, and then there's some other wonderful parts in it when he actually gets back and revisits the Mississippi later as in his middle age. It just has a lot going for it, and I think it gets at the very root of his early genius, and I think it's a very underrated book. I like it just tremendously. It came out in 1883, 2 years before Huckleberry Finn. And I just find myself rereading it quite a bit. He hadn't undergone any of his life tragedies yet, and he was, you might say, at the top of his game.
Thank you.
I was wondering, I so enjoyed your talk. I was wondering if you could tell us, you've teased us with these almost 6,000 entries. Could you give us a little spoiler of what we might expect in volume 2? Maybe something that surprised you in the marginalia, or you mentioned that there's some new books that you have found from his library. If you could just maybe give us just a little something to hold us over until the publication of volume 2.
Well, every entry was a rabbit hole that I often fell into. I would think, well, this I can dispatch very quickly and then get to bed, and it turned into something much more complicated than I suppose. For example, there's a very now obscure writer who was very famous in his day, Thomas Bailey Aldrich. He was a poet, but also a fiction writer. And he wrote a piece called The Little Violinist, and Twain wrote to him after it appeared in a magazine and said, "Oh my gosh," he said, that story struck water in the shaft, as the silver miners used to say. He said, "I wept when I read it." And well, I had to get into that and find out the sources, and it took me quite a while to find out that it actually was not a fiction story. It was the story, and a very pathetic one, of a little 8-year-old child prodigy who was taken all over the country to play the violin, and played remarkably. And one night, after an especially arduous performance, he collapsed and died in his hotel room of an undiagnosed heart ailment at the age of 8. And Aldrich had worked this actual thing that I found in newspapers into a short story, and that's just one example. And I tried to turn up as many of these as I could, partly because, and I think this is the real innovation over my 1980 effort to bring a preliminary report to people. I tried to construct a subject catalog, and you can look up in the subject catalog about the enslavement of African Americans as a topic. You can look up the Spanish-American War, astronomy, science fiction. You'd be kind of surprised how many books on human sexuality Twain had. I mean, rather daring books for his time to have in a library. You can look up ancient Roman works, ancient Greek works. I list Native American captivity narratives, all the books about California, books about San Francisco, and so forth. So it will save the reader a lot of flipping about, I think, to have this. But to construct such a subject catalog, I had to get in there and find out what was really there, and how people might perceive it. What I would say my biggest surprise to me personally was I started a subject entry under women's rights, and Twain at times, being a sort of a stand-up comedian in a way, joked about certain movements on behalf of women, but also wrote at other times when he was being more serious in support of women's suffrage and so forth. And my golly, it's one of the longest lists in my book is women's rights or works that Twain owned in his library that were edited or written by women who were advocating for women's rights. That I think will open a lot of people's eyes, and as will, I think, the entries on enslavement. After all, Twain was one of the few authors who dared to even treat slavery at a time when most authors post-Civil War were just trying to ignore it or refer to servants or something. Twain got it out there front and center, got away with it to an extent by adding humor into the book in places, but Huckleberry Finn was a rare book at that time for even displaying anything about the subject. I think my subject catalog is the thing I'm most happy to bring to readers, and feel like I've really done something there to save people a lot of time and a lot of effort, and they will much better understand Mark Twain's mind, I think, when they see all of those titles and how much he wrote in them and about them. But the pandemic, has had the effect of curtailing library budgets, and they often took their acquisition librarians off duty and used them in other ways. So I'm hoping that this will find its way into libraries eventually, but the pandemic's had I'm sure those of you who are in academia know, the pandemic's had a terrible effect on our library collections. And I hope I don't meet another discouragement here, in that I've done all this work and we have trouble getting the book moving into the libraries where it belongs. I think it'll be very important whether how it's reviewed and where it's reviewed. Choice chose not to review my volume 1, so we'll see. Choice is a key gatekeeper for libraries. But I'm so proud of the press for giving me this opportunity to get this. I think New South is. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think New South is interested in doing this project because they feel like it sheds new light on on someone who was at one time a Southerner, and we are located in Montgomery. But New South has a wide range of titles. They have everything you can name, from poetry to cookbooks to travel, history, fiction.
What happened to his voice?
Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Okay.
I just want to say, Alan, thank you for an amazing, wonderful presentation, and the great pleasure of us seeing everybody in your family all together. It's a real treat, and we're all just amazed at what you guys have accomplished. So thank you so much for all of us who love Mark Twain.
This is Dr. Patrick Ober, who has written a magnificent study of Mark Twain's interest in medicine. Dr. Ober is a physician and a professor of medicine, and we're all in his debt for bringing his medical knowledge and showing us how cleverly Mark Twain would work in various references to medical procedures of his day, and then some of the frauds that were perpetrated as supposedly medical.
If I may, Alan, I just wanted to say, Suzanne and I wanted to say how delighted we are to be a part of this, and what a pleasure it is to have you as an author for books that we have published. They're outstanding books. The scholarship is so solid, and the writing is excellent, and we have enjoyed every second of working with you on them.
Well, it's a great honor to be picked up by your press, and I just was always been happy about it. Some of you, that was Randall Williams, the editor-in-chief of New South Books, and some of you maybe saw the 60 Minutes presentation about a decade ago, where Randall was interviewed about an edition of Mark Twain, and I thought Randall was so good in that interview with Byron Pitts.
You know, I often think, Alan, that if Twain were alive, he would be amused and probably bemused by the adventure we've had trying to protect his work, trying to champion his work. I mean, this has been an amazing journey, you know, not dissimilar from your own personal journey of 50 years, but we've just been thrilled to participate in a small part of that. But I mean, it's you know, just an amazing thing that we're still out there trying to, you know, celebrate what he has given us and get others to be, you know, to learn about him. It's really been remarkable.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne LaRosa, the publisher of New South Books. They have if you're ever in Montgomery, they have a bookstore downstairs, and then there's a operation upstairs that not everybody gets invited up the stairs to observe. But I've been called up to the conference room a couple of times, and they really get down to business.
You know, as we say in the South, and I'm not a born Southerner, as many of you know, but we don't know a stranger, right? So come on and stop by. This is great. Thank you for all you've done. This is wonderful presentation, Alan, a really, really wonderful presentation. I want to say thank you to Alicia too. You know, she has held the torch, carries the torch for this literary festival. She's been remarkable over the last few years, challenging years for such programs, you know, keeping the faith, staying involved, involving all the parties she can involve. Alicia, I think you do a great job during hard times, and this is a remarkable statement about what you do.
Thank you so much for that, Suzanne.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I think we're going to sign off, if you will. We haven't had dinner. We got to come back to our guest tonight. Valerie, Irene, we love you. And Alan, thank you again. And if you will, we're going to sign off and we'll talk to you all again shortly. Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. Our pleasure.
We'll see everyone again at the book party for volume 2.
Right. In the fall. Okay. All right. Bye-bye, you guys.
All right. I'm going to have to sign off for work as well. Thank you. Congratulations.
Bye, son.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Alan. Hello.
I just unmuted. I'm just saying hi to everybody. And thank you, Alicia, for just being so patient.
Oh, hi, Andy.
With all of us, with me, you know, saying, how am I going to do this? And you did it. You did it. Thank you.
It was new to us this year too. So, does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Gribben before we start?
Hello.
Am I on?
You're on.
Oh, I was just going to say that perhaps one good thing about the pandemic is without it, we wouldn't be meeting like this, would we?
It's very true. I believe Taylor Roberts had a question as well.
Yes, not a question. Hi, Alan.
Hello from Canada.
Yes, I am up in Canada. And I just wanted to congratulate you on this award, and also to your family. You know, it's wonderful that they participated with you and contributed so much. And it's so nice to see that they're proud of you. And we are too. And you've hunted down a lot of great books. And one of the highlights of my life was when I hunted down this book. That's your book, which, as you said, is so hard to get. That's volume 1 of the 1980 copy.
How much you want for it? I'll buy it.
I see the price inside. I'm not going to say, but you know who I got this from, of course, was from Kevin McDonald. And apparently this was from Hamlin Hill, his library. So it's a treasure that, you know, I've used through the years, and I will never give it up. Even when your new ones come out, I still love this one, and I was happy to get it. And I've been very I'm just so happy for you Okay, and thank you for everything you've done for Mark Twain studies. It's just terrific. Thank you and everybody who's here tonight. It's nice to see you.
Taylor, you just raised a question I'd like to pass along to Alan. After we have all three, or all, was it four? All the volumes of the new edition, is there any reason other than sentiment, nostalgia for keeping the original books?
Actually, no. Everything is in the new one. The publishers have signed off. They had to go to dinner, but they're still not quite sure whether we're going to do this in one more huge volume, or they'll break it into two parts. A problem is, if they do two, how to advertise it, and whether Choice will look at it this time or not, and so forth. So they're costing it. I think that's the verb they use, costing it, estimating it right now, and making that decision. That's out of my hands. But there will be this huge 6,000 entry catalog, and there will be this an enormous index, probably in smaller type.
Did Library Journal review the book?
Not that I ever saw.
Well, they're just as influential, I should think, as Choice. I've reviewed for Library Journal for many years. In fact, believe it or not, I started writing reviews for them more than 50 years ago. I'm still reviewing the occasional Mark Twain book, and I have a little bit of clout as far as getting them to review specific titles. So let me know if you need help with that.
I think New South would like to talk to you about that for sure. And you can find them on the internet easily. I imagine everybody wants their dinner. Thank you for staying on so long. I'll cut you loose here, but I very much appreciate your spending this much time with me tonight, and being so courteous to hear my various adventures. So I'll say goodnight and let you all go. Thank you again, Alicia.
My pleasure and honor.
Good evening, everyone from Monroeville. And again, this will be recorded. We will have it available on our YouTube page soon. So keep an eye on our social media for when we get all those posted. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you again, Dr. Gribben. Congratulations.
Thank you, Dr. Gribben. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.